welcome back to the Creative Heart Show, the show dedicated to the creative process, the creative journey, and all the highs and the lows that involves, where each week I'm joined in the studio by an inspiring creator of some sort, an author, musicians, artists, all kinds of different creative souls, and we go deep into that journey, the creative journey for them, in the hope that it will inspire our community in Hertfordshire and beyond. Today I'm joined in the studio by a really incredible person, Yemi Elegunde. I must tell you, you're in for a real treat here because Yemi's life story and his creative story are quite fascinating. Yemi, hello. Welcome. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. So I don't even know where to start because I've read your book and that's what you're here really to talk about. Yeah. And I've met you several times in different capacities.
Yes.
And every time we seem to put the world to rights. So hopefully today will be no different.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
So, thank you. Let's start with talking about your book.
Okay.
You've authored the book and you've republished it
Correct.
once as well. So we've got Yemi's copy here of Time Will Tell. So tell us about your story and your book.
Yeah, thank you. So Time Will Tell is a biography. It covers a period. I call it a period of my life, but obviously it goes on into today as well. It covers quite an important topic, which is international parental child abduction, which is when one parent takes their child or their children away from either the family home or the country in which both parents live without the knowledge or consent of the other parent. So that happened to me and to my sister. I was 7 years old. My sister was 5. We were born in London, England. And one day my dad came home and took us out for the day, and we ended up in Lagos, Nigeria, which is where we lived and grew up for the next 14 years without really seeing my mum again. So that's the idea of the book itself is to tell the story from the eyes of that child, you know, from the age 7, from realizing that you're suddenly in a new environment, you know, the understanding and the realization that you're actually here to stay and you actually have to harden up, toughen up, and the anger, the emotions, the roller coaster, everything through my eyes. It was like almost like a diary to some extent. But the key reason why I wrote it was because there was so much in my head. Mm-hmm. It just stayed there, and I think I had so much to talk about, and eventually I began to pen it out, not realizing that people would actually want to read it as well.
Well, I have to say I've read it, and it is an emotional roller coaster. It pulled at my heartstrings. Having children of my own, and one of them, you know, my son, who's quite a sensitive soul, is 10 years old. So not that vastly different in age from when you were taken by your father.
Yeah.
You were 7.
7, yeah.
And I must say I read it and my heart was breaking because I just thought my son at 7 or even now would not be able to, I don't know how he'd cope with that. How did you cope?
I think when you're thrown into a situation, 2 things happen as I've learned as an adult. One is that when something very memorable happens, you remember exactly where you were, what you were doing, and so on. And the other thing is, if you're thrown into, you know, water and you can't swim, you'll fight. You'll fight for your life. You know, you do your best. You may or may not survive, and some people don't. You know, even through parental abduction, because there's various types of parental abduction. It's always the one parent taking the child away, not always the father. In fact, the mother does it much more than the father.
Really?
Yeah. I think I read something a while back that says about 75% of abductions are done by the mother because they feel that they have the right. About 23 or 22 is done by the father, and the other 2 or 3 is actually done by a family member.
Another family member?
Yeah. So, you know, because somebody may have asked a family member to help them take the child out of the country and so on. So it's not always the father. But the key thing is, in my case, going back a little bit, so different type, you know, my dad took us away because of his love, and he just couldn't bear to be without his children. But I've met lots of people through this, and I know people who took their children away because for sex slave or
They
sex
took
trading.
their own
They took
child.
their own children. Yeah, Thailand is a very good example of a country where people have taken children out of this country to Thailand, and it's all for sex trading.
Oh no.
You know, there's been parents who've taken their children away and, you know, and then just abused them anyway. And you've wondered why they even bothered to take the child. So in my case, it wasn't that. It was just that my dad was not going to let my mum have us.
But I guess from a 7-year-old's perspective, and that's where you write that book from. You're writing it as the 7-year-old and through the ages as well.
Yeah.
You don't fully know, and you don't understand that it's coming from love, and you never seemed to hate your father in the book. I never got a sense of that, but it was more, you just got on with it in a way.
I was angry at him for many years, very many years. I was angry at him. In fact, we didn't speak for 12 years when I came back to England. With the book, what I did actually was I take people right from the first page. I take you straight into Nigeria and straight into, you know, the action, as in, you can imagine this young boy who's never seen any of this in his life, and there he is, clay roads, dust everywhere, middle of the night. Most of the area had no power because the electricity was out, but you see pigs running around, goats, little kids barefooted running in just their underwear. You see people playing ping pong in the rain, and all I could think was, where am I? What is going on? And that's where I take people to immediately in the book, because I wanted them to picture exactly what this was all about.
What you saw and what you felt at that moment.
Indeed. Yeah, so I was angry at my dad, but I was also angry at my mum later on in life as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's just quite phenomenal. And you've become an ambassador. There's an organisation or a charity for parental abduction.
Correct.
And you're an ambassador for them as well. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
There's a few charities that look after this from different perspectives. Reunite International is the biggest one, and I've done quite a bit of work with them in the past, and we do charity walks, and they understand. I think the lady who founded it, her own daughter was abducted as well many years ago, so she understands it from that perspective very well.
She's a parent.
She's
who's
a parent,
had a child taken away
who's experienced it as well. And then there's Abducted Angels, who the founder of Abducted Angels is a father who had his son taken away to Thailand.
So you're quite rare because you're the child who was taken. You were the child who was taken.
Yep. That's the key thing.
That's quite rare, isn't it?
Absolutely, that's the key thing, and I think that's what has generated a lot of interest in the book and my story. Is that usually you hear from either the left behind parent. Sometimes you get to hear from the parent who took the child away, but you never hear the perspective of the child, because most of them, or maybe most of us, don't want to talk about experiences later on. My sister, for example, just wants to live a nice, quiet life, and she doesn't want to talk about it. It took me a lot of persuasion to get her, for me to be able to put her photos, her pictures in the book. You know, she finally agreed to it, but she didn't agree in the first version of this book.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because it's interesting, when I came to the photos and I carried on reading beyond, I found myself always, every time you mentioned different characters, I went back to look at them, because you get to know everybody. And I met you on the radio, and we connected, and then I read your book.
Yeah.
And then when I met you again after that, it was very different. I feel like I know you in depth. And I guess we're here really to talk about the process, that creative process of how you take that quite a traumatic story, and that incident and all the emotions that you've just described, and then put it into a book all those years later.
Yeah. As you can imagine, I'm not a full-time author, so you know I have my full daytime job. But as I said, a lot of these things had been in my mind for quite a long time, just in there. And you know, you'd sit down at bars or talk to friends who've known me for years, and but they never knew that I spent some of my life in Nigeria, and I'd mention something, to which they'd respond saying, "Wow, I never knew that," and the rest of the evening could be talking about my story in Nigeria. To the point that they would always say, "You should write about this."
I mean, you were taken at 7.
Yes.
You came back at 22.
Yes.
And then when did you write the book?
So I wrote the book where now it's 3 years ago. So I was already 44 when I wrote the book.
It took quite a while to get it out. Yeah. And how long did it take you to write the book?
It took 6.5 years to write the first book, and another 2 years to write this version of Time Will Tell. It took 6.5 years because it wasn't intended to be a book initially. It was just journals for me. It was memoirs for me. And I started by writing just a few notes because so many people over so many years had told me I need to write about it. I went home one day, and started writing a few notes, scrumpled it up, threw it away, wrote more, scrumpled it up. And then suddenly I got to the point, which is actually the beginning of the story. I started writing there, and I found a flow. So at this point I had 2 pages of A4, which I sent to a friend of mine in Germany. And she read those 2 pages and she just came back saying, wow, I never knew this.
2 pages was all it took for somebody to say wow, and that kind of pushed you to the next stage.
Yeah, she just, wow, I want to read more. So
was she just a random friend, or was she a publisher or
she was
editor?
just a random friend. She helped me a lot because being German, English not being her first language, it meant that she helped me a lot because when she read, the more pages that I created, she wanted to understand things perfectly, and she was the one who asked me, I need to understand what these roads look like. I need to understand, and that really helped because when people read it now, they tell me how it feels like I've put them there. They can picture it around them as well. But I wrote it over 6 years, which meant on different mobile phones. I did a lot of typing on mobile phones, different laptops, and PCs, and I always had to make sure that I never lost the full document. I did a lot of the writing in airports, and it was a good thing. Whenever my flight was delayed, it was almost a blessing.
So you're one of those rare people that goes, yes, I've got some extra hours in the day.
Indeed, absolutely.
So how do you get from being in everyday life to being in that creative space to be able to write?
Again, I think I'm lucky because this is my own story, so I know this story. It's much more difficult when you want to create a story out of fiction. But yeah, to switch modes, it took a long time, but there was things that I realized. On a Saturday morning, I might be lying down in bed and I'd pick up my laptop, which is my work laptop, and I'd want to do a bit of writing. But then I realized I'd just be doing my work instead. So in the end, I had to go and buy a separate laptop for my personal business, so that if I picked that up on a Saturday morning, I'd actually be writing and not working.
So I guess the first bit of advice for any aspiring authors out there is to block time.
Correct.
So what you had to do was you realised this pattern of getting sucked into the everyday stuff, and you had to...
You have to block time and also keep the distractions away. You really need to keep the distractions away. I never had music on in the background. I like everything quiet when I work, because I want to think. I want to be able to, be precise in what I'm doing and never rush. Maybe the more experienced authors who are not traditional publishers have deadlines and so on, but that's their job. But for me, there was no rush, there was no limits, there was no expectations from me whatsoever.
So it took you that 6 years,
yes,
because you just could do it as and when.
As and when I wanted to. This version that you see here took 2 years, and that was it may have taken longer if people weren't pushing me, but everyone wanted to read the revised edition. So in the first book, I didn't know that it would become a published book and that it would sell well.
You were just writing it as a cathartic healing.
Correct. It was very therapeutic for me, and that's what I did it for. But as soon as someone saw the full draft, which was in A4s, which I gave to a friend of mine in the UK, he read it, passed it to his wife, then it went to their mum, and it just kept going around. And then I ended up at their barbecue, where they were really excited, and I had something like 40 people all around me asking me questions and saying, we need to read this.
Oh,
and
wow.
That is when I went home and sent it to publishers, expecting rejections on it as well.
And did you get rejections?
No, I sent it to 4 publishers, and all 4 were happy to take it on board.
But so I thought you self-published your...
Yeah, I sent it to 4 self-publishing companies, and all 4 were happy to take it on board.
So can I ask another about publishing? Why self-publishing as opposed to the traditional route? Or did you try the traditional route of, that the traditional means, isn't it, where somebody else
buys the rights
the
to
rights
own
to
the book.
Yeah.
And they pay you a lump sum maybe, and then you probably get some royalties maybe. In self-publishing, you actually pay to everything out to get the book published. Why did I go down that route? Because in my eyes, I'm Yemi, but to everyone else who doesn't know me, I'm nobody. And it's more difficult, I think, to go to a traditional publisher and say, "Hey, I've got this." With a traditional publisher, they also want they won't talk to you. I don't think they want agencies, so that you
Right.
need to have an agent. And I didn't think at that point that the agents would understand how personal the actual story is to me. It was more important that I could sit down with whoever was going to publish the book and make sure that they understand that it's a really important story where I have a lot to say about both my parents, both positive and negative. And I want it all to be portrayed in the correct way, in the way that I've written it, and I want the emotions that I've put into it to be portrayed. So thankfully, when you're ready, you could feel
Yeah.
those emotions.
So would you consider yourself a creative? Because most of the people that we have on the show are what I'd call the more traditional creative. They feel inspired and they make music, or they write, or they speak, or they create comedy.
Yeah.
Because it's a creative, inspirational idea. Would you call yourself a creative?
Yeah, definitely. I would. The book is one thing. Of course, I didn't know I could write a whole book, but I can clearly write, and I've always been able to write. But yeah, my mind. I'm thankful. I'm very lucky. I've got a mind that's always thinking of things and ideas, and things to do. I'm a football referee as well, and I've also got something in my mind now to try and write something interesting or create a site that's quite interesting about being an official, a football official, because people ask a lot of questions about that.
Really? Do they find
Yeah.
it an interesting role?
They find it, everyone thinks that you need to be tough and thick-skinned, to be a referee, and I can understand that. And yeah, I do have my ups and downs as a referee. You have, fortunately for me, I have more good days than bad days. I think I've been a referee now for 13 years, and people understand my style of refereeing as well.
So this is your first, well, first and second, but it's
Yeah.
the one project, isn't it? The
Correct.
creative. That was the start of that sort of the author.
Indeed.
Yemi,
Yeah,
the author.
it is.
And now you've got more books.
I'm writing. I've got some projects. So the referee thing is one thing, but I've also got something else on my mind. In fact, I started with, just to give you a snippet of what I started working on. I've got 2 books that I'm writing,
Yeah.
and the reason why I'm writing 2 at the same time is because sometimes you lose inspiration or direction on one,
Yeah.
and hopefully you still got it on the other. For example, I tend to, when I learn languages, I tend to learn 1 or 2 at the same time.
2 languages at the
At the same time, yeah. Because
How many languages do you speak?
fluently, very fluently, maybe 3, which would be English, Yoruba, which is the Nigerian language, and Spanish. But I also do speak some German, some Russian as well, and French as well.
So are you going to publish this book in other languages?
Yeah, I've got a friend of mine actually in France who's doing the re-editing for me in French, and I've had an offer from Poland as well so far. But of course, the big languages is where I'd like to go. So I'd want to do German and Spanish.
So I've got 2 questions.
Yeah.
Creative high, your creative wow moment, and your creative low.
Wow. Okay. Very
Yeah.
very good questions. Creative high has to be the book. I think it's a legacy for me, and one of the best things that I've done with and I'm very proud of that.
So opening that box where you take out your first physical actual book.
Yes.
Was a wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's exactly what it was. I looked at it and I thought, I did this. This is really my name on there. So that is a real high. I don't think I've topped that so far. I'm looking to, but not right now. Creative lows. Now that's a really good one. I'm a very positive person, and I find it hard to look negative at most things. I'm always looking for a way to turn bad into a good. But at the moment, if I'm picking on a low, it would be that I've been working on both these books that I mentioned for the last 4 years now.
Wow.
And I haven't touched either of them for over a year. So, the inspiration maybe is because of my daytime job and the work I still do around this and everything else. But I just need to find that motivation again to go back to writing, because I get asked all the time, when is your next book coming out and so on.
I think that is a point. I mean, you've touched on something that is so true for many creative people is the frustration of not completing.
Yes.
And things kind of, life almost
Goes on
interfering,
and on.
getting in the way,
Yeah.
kind of preventing you. But you also touched on that the motivation comes from within. I think we prioritize in life the things that we choose
Yes.
to prioritize. And if kind of lighting that flame under those books for you becomes important enough to you,
You'll complete
you'll find
it.
a way. Yeah.
A lot of people that I've met ask me, how do you write a book? I've always wanted to write my story. How do you, what? I just can't imagine doing it and so on. And my dad is a prime example. My dad always wanted to write about himself as well. And that's another project that I've got, because I've got all his diaries now. He always wanted to write about his story, which is also quite fascinating in the sense that he's the ninth of 10 children. He lost both his parents by the time he was 9. He'd lost both his parents. So he grew up with one of his brothers, the oldest brother, what is pretty much his father figure. And, he came to England as a young man himself, but his love for Nigeria, as I understood later on in life, and
I got that, he was
book,
really loved
he's so passionate about the country.
I mean, I would be excited to read that book, having read this, to think that the child was abducted by his father, and you can see that you have a level of respect for your dad that carries through. You never
Correct.
really bad mouth him or
No.
anything like that. And I know that that's quite important to you to maintain that integrity. But then to think that you would write his life story written by you after everything that you've been through makes an excellent sequel or twin or brother, sister, whatever to what you've already written. I think I'd love, can I put in a request? Can that be the next book, please?
Now, you've really got me thinking now, and that might really be a good idea. Like I said, he's been passionate about wanting to do something, writes about his life, and I think I might actually go back home now and, start the process on that. Because I think that would be more exciting, and I know the story a bit more.
You can put the Creative Heart show in your forward and say stopped and restarted thanks to.
Absolutely, yeah.
It'll be our claim to fame.
Absolutely, yeah. It's something that I look forward to, and I think I will do. The reason why I'm so loyal to my dad, in spite of what he did, is because, in all honesty, as a parent myself, I put myself in his shoes, and I thought, he was once just a young boy himself, who innocent young man or young boy, just like I was, and he made mistakes like I've made mistakes, and the fact that I had my daughter there was, my daughter was born in 1999, which I left Nigeria in 1988, so 11 years later. Actually, I didn't speak to my dad for 12 years. From the age 22, I didn't speak to him for a period of 12 years, not once.
So having your daughter
was the
got
motivation.
You to reconnect. And
Correct.
He read your book?
He read my book, fortunately. He read the original book, which was the one written in 2011. And there was lots of questions that people had from that book. I think I must have got over 1,000 emails from people all over the world asking questions. All those questions.
How did that feel, to think that so many people had connected? And those are only the ones that took the time to write to you, yeah?
Correct, yeah, that was fantastic. And also amazing was the fact that there were so many questions from all those people, but when you narrow all the questions down, it was 9 questions.
Okay.
Why did your dad do it? Can we see pictures in color? Can we see pictures of your dad's house? And so on. So it was just a few questions that were missing. How did you restart your life in England when you came back? And so on, things that I didn't think were important in the first book. So fortunately for me, my dad had read the original, and he gave me a lot of information as to why he did it from his point of view. My dad obviously lives in Nigeria. Then I was able to go to Jamaica to see my mum and show her what my dad had said and ask her from her point of view. And so both parents helped me to make this a much better book. And the amazing thing is, I get lots of feedback on this, telling me how wonderful, how amazing and so on it is, but no one asks any questions.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it seems like I answered all the questions.
You have, but for me, what's interesting is the emotional way that you dealt with it, because, to be honest, you were ripped out of what you know and dropped in to a very tough society, a very different way of living. And you went from boarding school to boarding school to boarding school to so I was reading it going, I was angry with your dad, you know, and I was like, why uproot your child to put them into boarding school? And obviously he did what he thought was best for you, and you did academically, you did very, very well, and you worked very hard. But I really admire the man that you've become, and also the child that you were throughout all of that. And I think you show that beautifully in the book. Did you get help to do that, to pen that, or did you write it all?
I wrote it all entirely myself. All I had was an editor to do the editing, but the whole book was written by me because I think I know the story inside out. But you picked on a couple of very good points there. One is the fact that we arrived in Nigeria, and within from the day that we arrived in Nigeria, we lived with my uncle, so we didn't live with my dad. And within a month, let's say, I was in boarding school. I was in my first boarding school. I'd never even knew what boarding school was until then.
That's a hard life, right?
Yeah, indeed. Then we went from that boarding school to another primary boarding school, then to a third one because, we couldn't get on. The third one was hellish for me because, my dad thought it would be the best one because there was a family member there who he thought would be good
that
to
was
me.
the hardest read. Yeah.
And instead, as you know,
I'm not going to say too much because actually, people need to buy the book.
As you know, she was quite special, to say the least. So I had, a bad time there. Then I finished my primary school life and went to secondary school for 4 years of boarding school in the school till that became defunct, and then I lived with another teacher.
Was writing all of that for you? How was that emotionally when you were having, as an adult now, to kind of get back into that space? How did that feel?
Some of it makes you a little bit angry still, but the good thing is it's so many years ago that you can just look back and say it's a period of my life. But some of it makes you quite emotional. For me, the most emotional parts, the bits that used to set me off when I talked about the book, was thinking about my sister and I and how inseparable we were for so many years as kids. At boarding school, I'd be in the boys' dormitory, of course, and my sister had the girls. We'd go to bed for siesta afternoon, and then as soon as we're out of siesta time, once the bell goes, as soon as I come out of my dormitory, either my sister will be out there waiting for me, or I'd go over to hers and I'll be out there waiting for her.
You were together a lot until you were
until we were separated later on. We were inseparable.
People used to tell us, no.
Yeah, people used to tell us, do you know that you're gonna be separated at some point? And we used to think, nah, impossible. We're extremely close now. We talk.
Still,
yeah. We talk probably 2 to 3 times a week because we do live quite far apart.
You went through something that actually does increase that bond, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think much as I was the older one and I looked out for her a lot, I think if I didn't have her there, it might have been a much more difficult.
But you were staying strong for her, weren't you?
Yes,
and that shines through in the book as well. And what about the lows?
The lows, obviously
of that creative process.
Yeah.
You know?
So on the low side, I think it's the motivation and the time are the most important things there. And I would to some extent love to be able to have a full-time job where I could be an author and so on. But I enjoy what I do for a living. I really do. So. But I would like to. It's been 1 year now since this was published. It was published in January, actually, 2014. So we're close to a year, and I would love to have picked up some of my other work, and continued with it by now. But I think I might go home today and start something different.
Hopefully, we've inspired you somewhat as well. If you were to give any aspiring authors any tips or any suggestions on authoring a book, it's a biography, right?
Yeah, it is. Well, the thing is, be honest, stay loyal, don't worry too much about what other people will think. To be honest, most people, if you've written a true story and you've stayed true, will appreciate what you've written. Even people who have said bad things about, in my own family, have read the book and they love the book because they all know it was true. So I would say, find time, find a nice quiet area.
I suppose it's what you need. Know what you need, because I like to work with a bit of background buzz going on when I'm writing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, indeed.
so
but
for you, quiet is
quiet
key.
is
So
important
know
for me.
what works for you and
Yeah.
and create that space.
Absolutely.
And
But the
what
most important thing, especially if you're writing anything really, whether it's a biography or a fictional story, is to share it with people that you trust all along, because it's amazing the amount of feedback that you get. But by the time I published the book, I'd shared it with, and they're all named in there, I'd shared it with probably 20 people that I really trust, and they were not all in the UK, which is also a really good thing. Share it with people who speak a different language to you, because that will really help. They'll give you feedback where they don't understand what you've written. You can simplify it so that everyone understands it. And I think that's some of the best feedback that I've got is it was an easy read, could not put it down, and so on. So I think share your work. Some people don't like to share, they like it as a surprise. But I think that if you do share it, you get a lot more feedback and a lot more help. And people have experiences, which may come into play with what you're trying to write as well.
Okay, that sounds like great advice. And so we've spoken about publishing. You self-published.
Yes.
Is there anything about the publishing process that you think would be beneficial for people to know about?
Yeah. Obviously, looking for a self-publisher there are plenty of them out there. It's also important to try and find the one that suits your needs the most. In my experience, I've had two self-publishers. One was an international publisher, an American-based one, and they did a good job. They got the book out very quickly, but they took my advice all along. I designed the front cover, I wrote my synopsis on the back, I did absolutely everything. They gave me no advice.
So there was no input from
No,
them, and that is quite...
So when the book was published, it was a bit wider than all the other books on the shelf, so it wouldn't go onto most shop shelves. I think some people like the front cover, which was my idea, but with this one, the key advice I got was, rather than write "Time Will Tell" in one line, which is what I did on the original.
They got you, the layout was
correct,
improved on, and
absolutely.
So it's interesting to know that some publishers give you a lot of input, and others don't necessarily.
Yeah.
And did the input help? Did it make a
the
difference?
input helps.
In terms of sales and getting people to take the book.
Indeed. I took this photo. They just said, send us a few photos, and they did all the work, which was perfect. The advantage of the international self-publisher was obviously they had a big reach internationally. The disadvantage was they didn't have a good reach in the country in which I live. So with the other self-publisher, the great thing about it was I was able to go and sit down with them, because they're here in England. I was able to go and sit down with them. They understood my story, and I met them 2 or 3 times before the book was published.
And how did you find them? Did you?
Oh, I was very, very happy right from the moment I spoke to them on the phone. Long before I went to meet them, I was happy. But
and I mean, how did you get to them? How did you find out about them?
Yeah, I googled. I just googled.
Good old,
But yeah, absolutely. But I tried UK publishers.
Okay.
And I looked through. Also, I've got the writers and artists. It's a big.
The guide,
the guide. That's it. Yeah, so I've got that. So I did look in that as well. I bought lots of magazines as well, because I wanted to, make sure I did a better job. And what I normally tell people now is, if I knew that the first book was going to be a published book, this is what I would have done.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's about, doing your research and knowing what you need from a publisher before you start looking for a publisher. If you just jump around looking for publishers, you can fall into all sorts of pitfalls.
I mean, that's sound advice, is to not just go out there looking for somebody to publish your book, but to understand that there is more to that process. So probably to work out and to study and to research what is involved in publishing and what you need help with, and find a publisher that's going to cater.
A publisher that suits your the style. It has to be a publisher. Mine's a biography, so it has to be a publisher who understands biographies.
Okay.
If you're writing a fictional story, it has to be a publisher who's in that kind of genre, and especially where you're going as well with it. But like I said, the most important thing is someone who absolutely understands what you are trying to do, because it's your money that you will pay out to them. You're going to also pay for their marketing, press releases, and a lot of other
all
things.
publishers offer that, or
The self-publishers, I believe that the best self-publishers will offer marketing as well. There
and
are
you
a
pay
few.
on top, so you pay to
You
publish
pay
the
to
book.
publish the book. You pay for the marketing. You pay when they're going to shows if you want to be part of it, because they'll display your book there. So there's a lot of things that you will pay for, and
And is it a lump sum, or are they
yeah,
bits and you pay for each bit, like you add on?
yeah. There's a lump sum for publishing the book. Part of it you would pay as a deposit, and then you pay the balance when the book is published. Then there's a lump sum again. They have different tiers of marketing,
Right.
so different levels, and each one has its own price, a price associated with it. I went for a top marketing one with this, and it did work out good for me. But yeah, there's that. Then there's all the book fairs and so on.
Do you go to those? You do the book fairs,
I've
or
been
they do the book fairs?
I've been to a couple of the book fairs. They go to most, and at least they'll put my book on display if I pay.
And do you do book signings and everything?
I do book signings as well. Yes, I've done a couple at Waterstones, one in Bedford, and another one, I think it was in Leicester.
And how did that go?
That was quite interesting. I'm lucky. I'm a salesman. That's what I actually do for a
Right.
living. So because Waterstone, for example, tell me, and this is probably a sound advice for anyone who's publishing and looking to do book signings, is most publishers or most writers are good at writing, obviously, but when it comes to selling in a store, they would sit behind the table and wait for people to come to them. I was quite different. I talk to people all the time, so I was happy to go up and say hello to people and just tell
So you
them
didn't
why I
just
was
sit
here.
there behind the desk and sign
No, I
books,
didn't
waiting
sit-
for people to
I
find
didn't sit
you?
behind the desk at all. I signed books over the counter. I signed them over the desk, but
Well,
I was always walking around.
Maybe one day you'll find, and I have a feeling with maybe future plans and things, because having read this, it should really be made into a film.
I
To be
hope so.
honest, I think it would be gripping and fantastic as
Yeah.
as a film, and will help the cause as well. I think it would help shed a lot of light. It would help a lot of people heal who have been abducted, and parents to understand. And it's got so many layers to it. So a film would be great. You might find that you end up with a stream of people queuing to sign. You won't have time to walk around.
Oh, that would
Selling,
be
huh,
nice.
to your book.
It'll be very good, because the whole ambition of the book for me is that it reaches the right people and it puts the right message across, and it helps people to realize the importance and the results of our actions in parental abduction. Not every child turns out to be like me, strong and
Probably
positive
very
about
rare,
it.
I
It might
reckon.
well be, yeah.
Very rare, because I don't know, after what I've read, how you turned out so forgiving about it all. And what about the editing process?
Okay.
Because
so
that is another, in terms of publishing, the creative process is you writing,
correct.
and you wrote as a labor of love and healing, as we've
Yeah.
already touched on. And then you saw you had a book, and everybody told you that you had the book, and then you went and found a publisher. Is that how it happens, or did you get it edited first?
No, I found a publisher first. So, like I said, with the first book, I got no advice. And the publisher just wanted the book, and, they went ahead
They were
and
publishing, you
published.
were paying them to publish it,
Correct,
but they didn't
yeah.
do anything with
They
it.
didn't look at it. They didn't look at the errors that were in there, and they didn't give me any advice, to say you need to go to an editor. Admit they might have written it in, small print and so on, but they didn't really, advise that. But what I learned in the editing is two things. One, I read my own book, in both the finished book and especially, in the work. I must have read it more than 50 times easily from back to
Wow.
front, because I think that's a good thing, because if you can read your own book and if you enjoy it, you've probably got a good chance of selling it as well, if you can keep reading it. But as for the editing, I learned a lot. I learned, when you write dad, for example, dad, when you're referring to my dad, it's a small d, but when you say I told dad, it's a capital D.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it's
So that's
it's
the
a
grammar
noun.
of it
Yeah,
all.
correct. In that case,
Oh, dad would be capital.
Yes, when
My
you're
dad would be lower. Yeah.
would be lower.
So when you're addressing your father, dad, you'd do it capital.
Yes, correct. Yeah, because it's like rather than saying his name, that's the difference.
So did you have an editor edit those
I,
things?
I did all those myself because I'd learned it from the first one.
Okay.
You know, there was things like numbers. So when you write 1 to 9, you should write the word, not the digits. From 10
and
onwards.
did your publisher help you? Did they point out all of this? Or?
No, people did who read the original book, you know,
So
pointed
you've
out.
never had it professionally edited?
Not the original book, no.
Okay.
So, and then there was a lady who sent me back a copy of my original book and had edited the whole thing. So,
Hello.
you know, yeah, so,
Nice.
yeah, Lucy Mellish, who lives in Germany, you know, she'd done that, she sent it back to me, so I sent her a new copy of the original one.
With her changes in it?
No, that was the original book,
Okay.
you know, because she'd sent me her own copy that she bought as well.
Bless.
Yeah. So, but what I then did is Lucy then became my editor for this book.
And is she an editor? Is that her job? Or
she does that as a hobby. You know, she's a part-time editor, but she did a wonderful job for me.
So I love that because it's almost like you've written this book out of as a labour of love, and it has taken you
Yes.
on a journey of its own and in a direction, because most people go and find an editor. The editor found you.
Yeah, the editor found me, and the best thing about it is obviously Lucy read the book because it actually meant something to her as well. Her own sister, who's English, abducted her own 2 children to Turkey. And this is another case of where parental abduction goes completely wrong, because unfortunately this lady, when she was found in Turkey, committed suicide and killed her own 2 children as well. So, you know, I must say I'm lucky actually, in spite of
So she
you know, my
must have found
experiences.
some comfort in reading your story.
She found some comfort. She found it very interesting. That her daughters read it as well. And yeah, I'm really proud and happy that she agreed to edit this book for me.
It's amazing. I just like how everything comes together, and in a way that's the creative process, because when you're doing something with the right intentions coming from the right place, things do tend to open up and to kind of move forward.
They do, and if you're positive and if you listen to people, you know, you would see you get a lot of luck along the way as well. I think it's all about listening to people, even when you're rigid in your opinion. People say things for a reason, you know, and I've always listened, and I've always taken little snippets and, you know, try and use it. And this is what really helped me here, because, you know, there were things that people were asking and people were saying, oh, but I need to know this, or why don't you do it like that? And even to the name of this particular book, because I'd written Time Will Tell before.
Yeah.
So do we name it Time Will Tell again, or, you know, do we call it a different name? But so I went out to lots and lots of, in fact, I put it on Facebook and Twitter, and there was all sorts of suggestions, and the 2 biggest were Time Will Tell and Time Did Tell. So the last chapter of the book is called Time Did Tell, because you know, that was quite interesting that people thought Time Did Tell, even though I didn't think it would make a good topic, a good header.
I almost think there's another book in that. Do you know what I mean? It's tagged on there, and you kind of think, and where's the rest of it?
Yes.
But it was lovely to see that, because I think a lot of people want to know who you are today as a result of everything that you went through. And I can't even begin to tell you the joy when I saw the title in there, when you just kind of threw it into a sentence, and I'm like, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it. As you journey through your life, and it's just kind of quite cleverly woven, and I do hope that you will write more.
I will.
And more
definitely.
about this. I don't, you know, I know you've done it all in one big book, but it's almost, there's more depth.
Oh, there is, you know, there's topics in there still. I mean, I said there was 9 questions. I answered 8.
Okay.
You know, so there is one question in there which people still say, hey, maybe there's another book there. And I took someone's advice, because they said, okay, I can understand you don't want to write about this, but you should at least say maybe there's another story in there. And I did put that into this book. I don't think you know where I'm talking about, but
it rings a bell, but I can't pinpoint.
It's to do with my stepsister, me realizing that I had a stepsister. So, you know, people wanted to know more about her. The reason why I haven't answered it is because it's a different story. It's nothing to do with this, and I don't believe it's my business because that's her
Or
story.
maybe your dad's
Yeah.
story is one with. I mean, you
Correct.
kept journals.
Yes.
You refer to them
Yeah.
throughout
Correct.
your life that you
Yeah.
kept journals, but you didn't have them when you wrote this book, did
That's
you?
that's the amazing thing. But it's the fact that I'd written something before.
So it was always in
It
you.
was always there. I think if I hadn't written it down before, maybe my memory would not have been so vivid. But I can't remember how many words there is in this book, but I wrote every single one of them from memory. I didn't have to go back to any I'd lost the journals anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, years on. But I think the fact that I did keep them at one point, I didn't know they would become important to
But
me.
it must have been a form
one day.
of helping you to process what was going on, because you
Yeah.
didn't, from what I understand, have anybody really that you could talk to. You had your sister, but she's younger, and she was
younger.
living it with you.
Yeah.
And there was no adult that you could turn to make sense.
No.
And I think that's what makes you, time has shown that you are an incredible human being, because
Thank
to
you.
have nobody, no adult guidance or really any close connections with any adults
Yeah.
who could really support you through it. They kind of just brushed it. It was just happening. Get on with
It's
it.
just
Get
on with your life.
And I think that is quite a defining characteristic of yours, which I really admire.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm lucky. A lot of my friends who know me quite well are quite impressed, and they all tell me the same thing. That wow, now that they know my story, they're amazed that I'm not an angry person, and I turned out this way.
So creatively speaking, what is next for Yemi Elegunde?
Oh, I think I'll continue to write. That's the key thing. So there's definitely more books to come from me.
Excellent.
And I want to do more things that are exciting, and hopefully not writing about myself, to really push myself now as an author. Like I said, I think it's easier to write about yourself, but the real test is to write something creative from your mind, something fictional. And I intend to do something. Yeah, I intend to do something on that.
I look forward to hopefully reading those very soon. And what's next for Time Will Tell? What would you like to see happen next?
Well, a lot of people who've read the book have asked about the movie, or something dramatic that they can watch. And yeah, so my next step really is two things. One is to get it better known worldwide, the book, and of course, from this, I want to be able to help other people going through similar things, whether it's the parents or the left behind, or the poor child themselves. But yes, for sure, it would be brilliant if one day this did go onto the screens.
Do you know what? I hope so too. Having read it and having met you, it's been an absolute delight to interview you today in the studio. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And I hope that you come back with more amazing creative stories to share. Do you know what I've loved about this particular interview is that your story is quite phenomenal, and the man that you've become through that story is very inspiring, and you've also got your own creative process that you've been through. And I think that anybody who wants to write a book and who wants to write a biography has got so much that they can take from this. So thank you for sharing your journey, thank you for sharing your life story, and your process as well. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Yemi.
Thank you very much. My pleasure as well. Thank you.
You've been watching another episode of Creative Hearts. Please remember to keep tuned into our channel, 21st Century TV on YouTube and on the web. Keep a lookout. We are going to be back with more exciting episodes. Take care.